All right, so I'm not going to do any of the things that you were told I'm going to do, principally because I don't do that kind of work, right? I'm a professor, I'm a scholar, I traffic in data. It's not my job to tell people how to wage an independence movement. In any event, as anyone who knows me knows, I don't advocate those kinds of solutions anyway, right? I work with political scientists, states make decisions, states are the primary actors in the international community, and the states which principally this Balochistan problem exists in, they are very strong states. We're talking about Iran and we're talking about Pakistan. The Baloch in Afghanistan really are not a part of this, although some people like to say they are. I spent a lot of time in Afghanistan, it's simply not true. So I'm not going to talk about this way forward because that's not my place and that's not what I do. And if I did do those things, I'd be trying to figure out how I get my country away from Trump. So clearly, these are not things that I can do, otherwise I would have gotten rid of him. Politically, peacefully, of course. But what I am going to do is try to talk about Balochistan, and I'm going to talk about this from the Pakistan point of view. I've only been to Iran once, and that was a long time ago, so I'm not going to talk about Iran. I'm going to mostly focus upon how Pakistan has both inherited a problem in Balochistan and what tools it is used to manage it to try to put some empirical fencing around this problem. And I don't actually want to talk a lot, because I actually want this to be a Q&A, so I'm not going to dominate this microphone. There's been a lot of microphone dominating, and I prefer to not do that. So I think it's important that we understand how Pakistan came to be, right? Pakistan came to be on the basis of a mobilization around a concept known as the two-nation theory. Having taught in Pakistan, I can tell you that many Pakistanis learn a very bastardized version of what the two-nation theory was. Many people believe that the two-nation theory, from the get-go, was an argument for Pakistan's independence, and that is simply untrue. The work of Aisha Jalal and Farzana Sheikh, among others, makes it increasingly likely that this was a maximalist bargaining position that Jinnah put forward. And the argument that the two-nation theory, Muslims on the one hand and Hindus on the other, are equal nations, even though they differ in their numerical size, but nonetheless merited equal representation in a parliament of a united India. This was a bargaining position. In the Indian National Congress was never going to accept that position because it basically vitiates the one person, one vote principle upon which most democracies, except the United States, because we don't have that either, is based. And as I think most of you know, the British decided that to ramp up their decolonization process, to make both countries independent in 1947. And the INC principally feared that if they could not agree upon a constitutional dispensation, that maybe the British would undo their decision to expedite the independence process. And the INC basically said to Jinnah, fine, have your Pakistan. Good luck with that, right? So this was not a demand initially for an independent Pakistan, but rather a bargaining position to give more political power to Muslims in a united India. And the further piece of evidence that, for example, Aisha Jalal would put forward to advance this argument, in addition to the various things that Jinnah himself said, was the fact that Jinnah himself was completely unprepared to govern Pakistan, right? And some of the things that he had to do to get this Pakistan agreed to, and basically the election of 1946-47 was the proxy for that, was essentially lying to just about everyone about what Pakistan was going to be. And so Hussein Haqqani, among others, has argued that when people cast their vote in 1946, they weren't exactly sure of this thing that they were voting for. We now know that many people in the NWFP, now known as KPK, never wanted to join Pakistan. In fact, they were very angry with Nehru for basically deserting them and giving them no assistance whatsoever and condemning them or resigning them to stay in Pakistan. We know that Jinnah had to overcome the different parties that were not interested in joining Pakistan, even in the Punjab. We know very few people in Sindh wanted to join. And we know that Baloch never had a chance to cast their vote because there was no Provincial Assembly at the time that this vote took place. Ironically, the only people that wanted Pakistan were the East Pakistanis. And once Pakistan became independent, the West Pakistani elites, who were at that time Muhajirs, they were very suspicious of East Pakistanis because they were culturally and linguistically, socially, more similar to Bengali Hindus than Bengali Muslims. So, excuse me, than the Muslims in West Pakistan. So I've argued, as have many others, that the seed of Pakistan's problems is actually the very nature of the two-nation theory itself. It's very othering, right? And then the second sin that Pakistan makes is the Objectives Resolution, which says that all laws are going to be consistent with the will of Allah. The Objectives Resolution basically put into place a permanent job for the ulama, or the religious scholars. And unlike Iran, where you have a hierarchical, clerical arrangement, you don't have that in Pakistan. None of the 5 muslaks in Pakistan are hierarchically organized. And this means that there's also a lot of difference about what Sharia should look like across these different muslaks. So as a result of the two-nation theory and of the Objectives Resolution, the first thing that needs to happen is othering other Pakistanis, right? In addition to the East Pakistani Muslims who were othered because they were considered to be too Hindu, they went after the Ahmadis, although I wouldn't be very clear, many of the things that Zia got blamed for, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto actually began. We know that they began going after the Shia, and today they're going after the Barelvis. And by the way, when I say they are going after the Barelvis, I'm specifically talking about Deobandis. So this problem of Pakistan really begins before Pakistan is even born. It begins with the way in which Pakistan was created, and it begins in the various lies that Jinnah told the people who were voting for this project. So turning to this particular issue of Balochistan, Balochistan, unlike the other provinces, never had a vote. But I also don't agree, and I have to say, being a professor listening to these speeches drives me nuts because there's a lot of historical errors that get stated in these kinds of things, and if I couldn't possibly intervene on every opportunity. So I'm going to be really clear that I don't espouse the narrative that I often hear at events like this. Balochistan, the Khan of Kalat, he did sign an instrument of accession. You may say it was under duress, but international law doesn't recognize such things. This is the same argument that the Afghans make to the Pakistanis in rejecting the Durand line. And who are you to say what duress is or is not, right? The fact is there was an instrument of accession. The other fact is that the Khanate of Kalat was not all of the territory in Balochistan. And we also know historically that parts of Balochistan were regularized parts of the Raj, while other parts weren't. It had a very similar governance arrangement that we saw in NWFP and in later Fatah. In fact, the Frontier Crimes Regulation applied to parts of Balochistan, right? So this means that historically there were different Balochistans. And this also means that the Khan of Kalat, his agreement was not with Calcutta, his agreement was with Southall, which means that the Indian Independence Act did not, strictly speaking, apply to the Khanate of Kalat, which means that he could have retained the option to remain independent. But we should not be confused that that particular piece of geography applied to the whole state. So the Baloch, they are a problem that Pakistan inherits from the beginning, in part because of the way partition played out, but also in part because of the ways in which the British colonized South Asia, right? So many people will ask the question, why is it that Pakistan is not a democracy like India? After all, they inherited the same institutions. And I said, well, the problem is they didn't inherit the same institutions. In fact, Pakistan inherited very few of those institutions, if at all, right? So if you look at the way the British colonized South Asia, and I'm in no way making an apology for colonization, do not take this away from what I'm about to say. For all intents and purposes, they start in Calcutta, right? And they arrive in Calcutta in the 16th century. And they move north and they move west. And by the time independence has come, everything else to the east of Pakistan had a much richer history of self-governance institutions. If you look at the ages of the various state assemblies, by the time you get to what becomes West Pakistan, you have differences in over 100 years of experience in essentially self-governance. The Indian Administrative Service, that stayed with India. All of the service academies, with the exception of Quetta, remains with India. There had been no history of ruling or governing, it's really ruling, because Jinnah set himself up to be the last viceroy, more than a prime minister. There had been no history of ruling Pakistan from Karachi, right? It had been a provincial capital. There was no infrastructure to govern this place, right? And we can go through and looking at each and every single one of these ministries. And one of the decisions that Jinnah had to early on make was he going to use the personnel to build the state or to build his party? He couldn't do both. And this is because of the choices that he made. The choice was to make Urdu the national language, even though a majority of Pakistanis actually spoke Bengali. And even though those in Bangladesh had a longer experience with the institutions of self-governance, they were othered as unequal citizens, and this would essentially sow the seeds for what would become Bengali independence and eventually Bangladesh. And in fact, no one in West Pakistan spoke Urdu, right? And this is something that's very well known to virtually all of you in the room, because many of the subsequent movements were about the disenfranchisement of non-Urdu speakers and their exclusion from the government, right? So he begins trying to build the government, but he can't build his party. So when people say, why isn't Pakistan a democracy like India? It actually happens in the DNA of the state, in the very early decisions, bad decisions that I would argue, that Jinnah made. And unlike Nehru, who wanted to deal with the multi-ethnic nature of the Indian state through devolution and federalism, and with each state's reorganization, with the exception of the Punjab for a very different reason, tried to increasingly realign state boundaries around ethno-linguistic groups, Jinnah decided to go the opposite route. He wanted to be a viceroy, he wanted a strong central power that would impose its will over its units. And right, in Balochistan, Sindh, and WFP, they all suffer, and obviously the East Pakistanis, they suffer very similar fates as this state tries to build itself on this fantasy that Jinnah had erected for the state. So what is the tool that Pakistan puts forward to manage the Balochistan problem? It turns out it's the same problem, it's the same tool that it tried to use in East Pakistan, Sindh, and WFP, and that is explicit Islamization. Many people think that this began with Zia. It did not begin with Zia, it began with Ayub Khan. Ayub Khan, Pakistan's first Pakistani army chief, who was also the first military dictator. In the late 50s, he says that the curriculum of Pakistan's public schools should be aligned with the ideology of Pakistan. And unfortunately, I couldn't get an internet connection here, otherwise I was going to show you some maps. Over time, each of the different military dictators had their own version of Islam. So there is change within this general broad parameters. But with respect to Balochistan, the solution offered by GHQ has been a combination of the following: Islamization in the insertion of a particular kind of Islam, Deobandis, but also Lashkar-e-Taiba, ironically, even though these are competitors. I have data going back to 1947 on the growth of madrasas in Balochistan. At the time of partition, there were 26 madrasas. By 2000, there were nearly 700. And I don't have the data, the current data at hand, although it's knowable, and it's much larger than 700. And in fact, would you believe that in Balochistan, you have the highest density of madrasa utilization of the whole country? It's even higher than it is in the Punjab. So it is not a surprise that when in 2013 I did a very large survey, including Balochistan as well as the rest of the country, I find no evidence of this vaunted Baloch secularism that Baloch in the diaspora like to talk about. In fact, in terms of attitudes on a wide array of political Islam issues, the Baloch look no different than the Punjabis who are so reviled. The only way in which they look different is their voting behavior. And I'm going to argue, and I have argued, that these data are a reflection of the state's effort to Islamize Balochistan. I have comments made by people like Hafiz Saeed saying that the only way that Balochistan is going to be, quote, saved is through the ideology of Pakistan. And non-state actors have been a critical way of inserting this ideology into the state. So this is one tool that the state has used. And ironically, they've also benefited from the wars that Pakistan has been waging in Afghanistan since the 1950s. Some of you may or may not know there was Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, who begins the so-called jihad in Afghanistan in 1974. It's very popular to blame the United States, and there's many things you can blame us for, but this was not our idea. Zulfikar was the one that thought this up. So one of the advantages to the deep state of these wars in Afghanistan actually has been the expulsion of Pashtuns, right, into Balochistan. And by the way, many Baloch, I think, are going to be very furious when the Pakistanis finally release the census data, because unless they do some pretty serious chicanery with the numbers, Baloch are not going to be the majority in Balochistan. We'll have to see how they fudge the numbers. But I've been doing surveys in Balochistan, I've done several, and there's no evidence that Baloch are a majority. You have to do quite a bit of adding of other categories to get that majority to work out. So not only are the Pashtuns being moved into Balochistan a problem demographically, because by bringing in these Pashtuns, they can say, well, this isn't really a Baloch state, right? This is a state which is now shared equally between Baloch and non-Baloch. Many of the Pashtuns in Balochistan embrace Deobandi variants of Islam. And you also have this natural process of socialization. So this has been one strand that the state has used to mitigate the Baloch problem. The other strand has been the willingness to kill every Baloch without consequence. And as I said yesterday, as an American, I feel as if I have a particular onus to own this, because in many cases, going back to Zulfikar Ali Bhutto's period, the Pakistani state used American-provided weapons to kill the Baloch. Now, we currently have legal instruments, most notably the Leahy Amendment, which requires the U.S. government to sanction any unit that is engaging in human rights abuses. And this will include the police, this will include the Frontier Corps, which has been a very extensive killing machine in Balochistan, as well as the Pakistan Army. To date, we have sanctioned one unit. And that only because a video of their murder went viral in Pakistan, and Hillary Clinton was forced to put this unit under Leahy Amendment sanctions. Since 2006, Pakistan's armed forces have been murdering Baloch with impunity, and the U.S. has done nothing, and it has said nothing, right? So I don't want you guys to think that the Americans care about Balochistan. It does not. I also pissed several Baloch off during the Rohrabacher hearing because I had the temerity to tell you the truth, that Rohrabacher didn't care about you. Rohrabacher was much more interested in facilitating his former congressional staffer, Eric Prince, who is the chief executive of Blackwater, who at the same time was promoting a division of Afghanistan so that he could have access to your minerals instead of the Chinese, right? So don't be fooled by Rohrabacher's hearing. This had nothing to do with you. This had everything to do with Rohrabacher's own personal agenda. Now we're in a situation where the Pakistanis, the stakes are higher now than they ever were because of CPEC. And I don't know if we have any friends from China here, but I'll be very blunt what CPEC is. I call it colonizing Pakistan to enrich China. And now the Pakistanis are vested in killing every Baloch to make Balochistan safe for Chinese exploitation. And unfortunately, the Punjabis in Pakistan are too foolish to look at Sri Lanka because they may as well just rename Gwadar Hambantota Annex. If you know what happened at Hambantota, you'll know what I mean by that. So the international system involves very powerful actors, none of whom care about Balochistan, right? And unfortunately, when we have responsible governments in Delhi talking about helping the Baloch, the first thing that the Pakistani state is going to do is to use those speeches to kill yet more Baloch, and they will use the very fact that the Indian Prime Minister made this promise to further taint you as Indian proxies, which is another way of generating zero sympathy among ordinary Pakistanis, right? So the Baloch do not have the beneficial position that the Pashtuns are in. The Pakistanis cannot simply kill their way out of their Pashtun problem for two reasons. One, Pashtuns are 15% of the population, Baloch are 5%. And even though they're only 15% of the population, they may be as high as 40% in the armed services, and the Pashtuns have long displaced the Muhajirs as the co-governors of Pakistan, right? So the Pashtuns are going to be in a very advantageous position relative to the Baloch. So, you know, I don't see this working out in a way that so many of you would like. So given that this maximalist position doesn't seem possible or feasible, what then can we try to do to make suffering in Balochistan less? Well, I absolutely support the establishment of a special rapporteur for Balochistan. The Pakistanis get away with this because it's virtually impossible to get news out of Balochistan. And Pakistani journalists that try to get information out, we know what happens to them. They're either killed or they're threatened with death, and I've seen the Pakistani media be intimidated, and we've seen what's happened to people who speak out. They have a very short span of speaking in public about this, and they don't let foreigners get in either. So the only thing that we can try and do in the near term is to try to get some attention by having a special rapporteur, but I also want you to sort of appreciate the limits of this. There's a full-on genocide happening right now in Myanmar, and the Myanmarese have the support of the Chinese, the Russians, and the Indians, and nothing has happened, right? So I'm going to end on a not terribly inspiring or confidence-building set of observations. The Pakistani state is a killing machine, and it has the support of the United States and China, which needs Pakistan to succeed in its various geostrategic aims, and neither of these countries are going to give a damn about the Baloch. And the Pakistanis have also been very clever, and they've also been courting Russia, and Russia also gives carte blanche to its clients to commit mass atrocities. So I think in the near term, what we have to do is think about what are these meaningful short-term steps where we can simply try to put the brakes on the killing machine, even if we lack the wherewithal to stop the killing machine. Thank you.